When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
Welcome back to Fine Tooning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainer-writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings in the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can still listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. Unfortunately, Drew, who, let me say right up front here, with no disrespect to all you James Brown fans out there, is actually the hardest working man in show business, or should I say that Mr. Taylor is the hardest working man covering show business these days. Anyway, Drew worked so hard this past week that he made himself sick. Sick as a dog. Not a cute little dog like Nova, mind you, but a big, ugly, shaggy dog kind of a being sick. Which is why I'm recording this show solo on Sunday, December 21st, which is a lot of you folks already know because the Fine Tooning audience are very smart, very well educated. You know already this is the shortest day of the year. Now, what I didn't know until I just Googled it is that the official start of the astronomical winter, the winter solstice, was actually at 10:03 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, which is just about the time I was making Nancy her avocado toast. I'm not sure if this is an appropriate food to serve as this particular time of year is getting underway, but my ex-wife, the lovely Michelle Valladolid, she sent a Harry and David fruit basket thing for Christmas, and you know the drill when you receive one of those things, right? I mean, you suddenly got this ticking clock on your kitchen counter, all of this delicious fruit and fresh produce that you gotta eat before it goes bad. But here's the thing about Harry and David. Fun fact, by the way. The company started back in 1910. It was first known as Bear Creek Orchards, and at that time, back then anyway, used to specialize in the sale of pears. I bring up pears because, well, the last time Harry and David box of stuff showed up at the house, I grabbed a pear and immediately bit into it, not knowing that the pears that Harry and David send in their boxes are actually supposed to sit on your kitchen counter for a couple of days and ripen, which then allows these succulent pieces of fruit to reach the proper level of softness. Anyway, long story short, because I'm a moron, I bit straight into a pear right out of the box and broke a tooth. No lie. Which is why I now approach a Harry and David box with the respect it deserves. Because fruit, which is supposed to be good for you, can be harmful in the wrong hands. My hands, to be specific. Anyway, when I checked that box earlier today and found out the avocado in there had gone soft, I immediately thought, okay, I'll use this as part of Nancy's breakfast, whereas the pears in this Harry and David box, I'm going to wait another couple of days before I risk my 66-year-old choppers on those beauties. Which I know has nothing to do with animation. Though that said, I guess I should mention another box I got in the mail last week, which came from a Secret Santa whose name I am not allowed to say, but this very kind individual who works at the Mouse House called in a favor at Disney Television Animation and got me a Nog plush. Nog, for those of you who don't know, is the baby harp seal that McGee, that's the character that Sarah Chalk voices in the Prep and Landing series of holiday specials. Anyway, McGee has a baby harp seal called Nog that she keeps as a pet, and Wayne and Lanny had the pet sit for that thing in Snowball Protocol, which is the third installment of Prep and Landing series, which I watched again when I was down in New Jersey and liked better the second time. Anyway, this year's holiday gift to Disney Television Animation employees was a Nog plush, and my Secret Santa was nice enough to snag one of these things for me and then send it up here to New Hampshire. And it's now sitting in a place of honor here in Nancy and my home, right there on the kitchen counter next to those pears from Harry and David, who are now crying out to me that, come on, Jim, take a chance. What's the worst that could happen, fat man? You could crack another molar. All right, enough vamping, me talking about me. Let's get to this week's edition of Fine Tuning. But first, we got to acknowledge our sponsor, which is UnlockMagic.com, where you get real discounts on Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando tickets, sometimes upwards of 12% off. And just so you know, Unlock Magic is run by the exact same team behind the DVC rental store and the DVC resale market. So if you're planning a trip to Central Florida in 2026, just pick your dates, grab your tickets, and go. Unlock Magic makes it that easy to rack up some pretty significant savings. Oh, and when you get your tickets, please tell the nice folks at UnlockMagic.com that it was Drew and Jim who sent you. All right, so Avatar and Fire and Ash opened in theaters worldwide this past weekend, so it comes as absolutely no surprise that the third installment of this top-earning James Cameron series came out on top at both the domestic and international box office. Stateside, Fire and Ash sold 88 million worth of tickets, overseas an additional 257, so you put it all together, and you're looking at a worldwide opening weekend of $345 million. But you know what did surprise me? How well David, that's the latest faith-based animated feature to be released by Angel Studios, how well that did domestically. It was number 2 at the box office, $22 million in North America, which, interesting, means that David managed to outgross the fourth film in the SpongeBob cinematic series, Search for SquarePants, that sold $16 million worth of tickets over its opening weekend in North America. And this Angel Studios release even managed to outgross Zootopia too. Though, to be fair here, that Byron Howard or Jared Bush film is beginning its fourth weekend in domestic release and did sell 14.5 million worth of tickets in North America, which, when you add that in with what this Walt Disney Animation Studios film has earned overseas to date, this sequel to 2016 Zootopia now stands at $1.27 billion worldwide. And just in case you're wondering, that means this film has already grossed more than $200 million more than the original Zootopia made 9 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see come mid-January or thereabouts, when Zootopia 2 is ending its theatrical run, where this animated feature tops out box office-wise. I'm not sure how Zootopia will do at the Academy Awards this year. I mean, it was back in November, or the 21st to be exact, that we learned that this Walt Disney Animation Studios production was among 35 films that are being considered for this year's Best Animated Feature Oscar. Worth noting that this past week we learned that 15 animated shorts are now being considered for in the Academy Awards Best Animated Short category. Gotta say, I was thrilled to see Aaron Blaze's Snow Bear in the mix. Likewise, very pleased to see Cardboard from Locksmith Animation being considered for Oscar, but what the hell, Versa? I mean, come on. That animated short has amazing art direction. It has it has some sensitive, heartfelt subject matter. I thought for sure this Malcolm Pierce film was a shoo-in for a nomination, but then again, I was the guy who looked at the initial commercials for you clowns, that new series on Adult Swim that debuted back on October 19th. And I said, look at that and thought, I don't know if that one's going to make it. It's got such a rough style. But nope, I was wrong, as I often am, which is why I am pleased to report that Adult Swim has just picked up This Joe Kappa Show for 2 more seasons. So, way to go, Joe. And speaking of going, I really need to get to this week's feature, which looks back at an animated featurette that Disney, back in the late 70s anyway, really thought was going to be a holiday classic. But before we talk about that, there's this.
In Walmart's Zootopia, time was ticking away. Only a few nights left till the big holiday. But last-minute gifters had no need to worry. Walmart Express Delivery got their gifts in a hurry. From Nintendo to Nespresso and Lego flowers, they could check off their lists in as fast as an hour. All of Who'Newville, East, West, South, and North, could order gifts up until 5 p.m. on December 24th. So this holiday, just do as the Who's do. With gift delivery this fast, they all gasped. From Walmart, who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
The Subaru Share the Love event is on from November 20th to January 2nd. During this event, Subaru donates to charities like the ASPCA, helping support more than 142,000 animals so far. When you purchase or lease a new vehicle during the 2025 Subaru Share the Love event, Subaru and its retailers will make a minimum $300 donation to charity. Visit Subaru.com/share to learn more.
And we're back. Really wish Drew were here for this part of this week's Fine Tuning. I mean, he, like me, is a student of a particular era of Walt Disney Animation. So we're talking the late 70s, right after The Rescuers came out, and on the heel of how well that animated feature did worldwide. I mean, seriously, folks, it actually outgrossed the original Star Wars in Germany. That's how big a hit The Rescuers was back during the summer of 77. Anyway, on the heels of that huge success, it looked like Walt Disney Feature Animation was right on the cusp of something truly spectacular. Well, as it turns out, Walt Disney Feature Animation was definitely on the cusp of something back then, but it wasn't another huge success, but rather a huge upheaval, which started, weirdly enough, with something small. Or should I say, the small one. I mean, have you folks ever seen the poster that Disney's PR team created for this animated featurette? Back when the small one initially went out into theaters, mid-December of 78 on a double bill with Pinocchio, this poster proclaimed that Don Bluth film was a new animation featurette destined to become a Disney holiday classic. Well, that's not exactly how things went down. Largely because of something that Don did some 10 months after Disney's small one debuted in theater, which was walk off the lot and take about a quarter of Disney's feature animation staff with him. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. The Small One, a 26-minute-long animated film about the donkey who carries Mary, the mother of Jesus, to Bethlehem prior to the Savior being born in a manger in a humble stable. The story of The Small One actually dates back nearly 80 years at this point. To be specific, to a children's book that Charles Tazewell wrote back in the mid-1940s. Charles was an author who, he died back in June of 1972, at the age of 72, not all that far from where I live in New Hampshire. Tazewell made his home, in the latter part of his life anyway, in southwestern New Hampshire, to be specific, in the town of Chesterfield, which is in Cheshire County, population of just 3,500 people. And to give you some perspective here, I live in New Boston, New Hampshire, which is considered a small town because we have just over, 6,100 people live here in this corner of Hillsborough County. So Chesterfield is a teeny tiny town by comparison. Anyway, Charles and his wife Louise deliberately chose Chesterfield to be their home back in 1954 after spending a decade or more out in L.A. And this is where Tazewell made a very good living as an actor, a radio playwright, and a children's book author back in the 1940s and 50s. And I'm not going to lie, it's kind of appropriate that we're talking about Charles Tazewell just a day or so before Christmas, because those were the sorts of stories that Tazewell specialized in. Tales that put an additional special spin on something we normally associate with the holidays. Case in point, The Littlest Angel. This was originally a radio script that Charles wrote back in 1939 that then went unproduced for 5 years. When Tazewell decided to finally take that same material and turn it into a children's book, well, the end result was one of the best-selling books of all time. In fact, by the time Tazewell died, again in June of 1972, The Littlest Angel had entered its 38th printing. Anyway, I'm sure you already know this story. It's about the 4-year-old boy who's just arrived in heaven, but is having a terrible time as he tries to fit in with all the other angels. I mean, the little boy's robe and halo are always dirty, and though he tries his best, he always sings off key when it's time for the heavenly choir, and this 4-year-old is always late when it's time for daily prayers. And in short, this kid is absolutely miserable up there in heaven. He just doesn't fit in at all, which is why when another somewhat sympathetic angel turns to his kid, well, what would make you happier up here? Well, this is when that 4-year-old talks about this box of treasures that he used to keep hidden under his bed back on Earth. And so the sympathetic angel flies down to Earth, collects the box, and then he brings it back up to heaven and hands it to the 4-year-old. And for a time, this little boy is much, much happier up there among the clouds. But then comes word that the Savior is about to be born. And everyone up in heaven now is now looking for ways to honor the Son of God. And they're creating these beautiful, ornate treasures to hand off to the Christ child. But this little boy, he doesn't have the skills yet to make beautiful, ornate things. All he has is his box of earthly treasures, which are humble beyond belief. They're a golden-winged butterfly. They're a blue bird's egg, 2 smooth stones, and then the worn collar of the littlest angel's dog, who died before this 4-year-old himself passed on and then transitioned to heaven. And so, even so, because all of the other angels are placing tributes to the Christ child up on this altar that's central in heaven, the littlest angel surrenders the one treasure he has. Tearfully places the humble box up there among all these fine, beautiful things that the other angels have personally crafted as their tributes to the Savior. But then, out of all the items up there in that altar, God selects the littlest angel's humble box because of all the items that have been placed up there by the heavenly community. This was the only one that was truly given with love. And God then sends his humble box high into the sky and transforms it into the Star of Bethlehem. And that ties back to what I was saying earlier, that Tazewell had a gift for taking things that we were all previously familiar with from historic holiday stories and then transforming them into something new. Anyway, Charles wrote The Littlest Angel, likewise The Littlest Snowman, and then, of course, The Small One. And Tazewell certainly had an affection for diminutive characters. I bet he would have been a big fan of Tiny Tim. Anyway, between The Littlest Angel and The Littlest Snowman, Tazewell wrote The Small One, which was first performed as a radio play on Bing Crosby's weekly radio show on NBC as a special Christmas broadcast back in 1946. And it was on the heels of this enormous success of that radio play that The Small One was turned into a children's book, which sold well for the next 15 years or so. So much so that Walt Disney Productions buys the film and television rights to this Tazewell-written tale in the summer of '61, with the idea that for the first season of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, which would debut on NBC in late September of that same year, 1961, Walt would then have The Small One adapted to television. That, more to the point, that this hour-long live action version of Tazewell's children's story would then be that year's special Christmas episode of The Wonderful World of Color. But that isn't what happened that year. Walt opted at the last minute instead to make the Christmas episode of that season of The Wonderful World of Disney a promotional special for Babes in Toyland. That was the studio's big live-action release for the 1961 holiday season. And as for the small one, it stayed on Disney's development shelf with the idea that, well, maybe for the 1962 season of the company's TV show, or possibly the 1963 season, Walt would revisit this property and then produce it as that year's holiday show. But that didn't happen either. And we'll get to what did, in fact, eventually happen with the small one at Disney Studios in a moment. But first, this.
The McDonald's snack wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch snack wrap. Spicy snack wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Kraft mac and cheese is the best thing ever. It's even better than pop music. You look just as natural enjoying us at age 13 as you do 55. Kraft mac and cheese. Best thing ever.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to tell you that Michelob Ultra, the official beer partner of the NBA, is bringing NBA fans closer than ever this season with chances to win great prizes, including courtside tickets. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra courtside 25 to 26. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 plus. Begins on October 1st, 2025 and ends on June 30th, 2026. Multiple entry periods. See official rules at MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, prizes, and details.
And we're back. So, okay, we were just talking about how when Disney Studios initially bought the film and television rights to Charles Tazewell's The Small One, the idea here was to take that children's book and turn it into a live-action 1 hour-long episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, the weekly TV series that ran on NBC, with the ultimate goal here that The Small One would eventually wind up as that year's holiday special of this anthology series. And just so you know, the Aristocats kind of went the same route. The studio initially bought the script for that project in 1962 with the idea that they were then going to turn it into a 2-part live action episode of the Disney Weekly television series. But over time, folks at the studio began to see the possibilities of transforming the Aristocats from a live-action episode of television into a full-length animated feature, which was how we eventually wound up with the Aristocats movie, which arrived in theaters in late December of 1970. And that's kind of what happened with The Small One as well. The studio had acquired the film rights to this children's book in 1961. It sat on the shelf in Disney's development department for the next 15 years, which is where Pete Young, who was looking for projects for that some of the newer animators of the studio could maybe work on, initially came across this Charles Tazewell story. And to Young's way of thinking, The Small One, with its small cast of characters and simple setting, would be the ideal project for Disney's next generation of animators to work on during a gap year at the studio. And by that I mean between when animation was being completed on Pete's Dragon and when animation would then get underway on the studio's next full-length animated feature, The Fox and the Hound. So, late 76, early 77. Pete Young takes The Small One to then Disney studio head Ron Miller, that's Walt's son-in-law, and explains what he wants to do, which again is an animated featurette, with the idea that once The Small World finishes its run in theaters, Disney could then turn around and offer this holiday story to one of the big 3 television networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, which could then run this thing seasonally as a Christmas special. And Miller reportedly especially loved that part of Pete Young's Small One pitch, that this project could eventually be taken to some television network and then begin airing annually as a holiday special. So Ron gives Pete permission to begin development on the project. And Young works up a slew of Small World storyboards along with veteran Disney storyman Vancieri. And for a time, it looks like Dick Seabast will be directing this featurette. But then again, because this movie version of Charles Townswell's Holiday Tale is largely seen in-house anyway, as more of a training exercise for the studio's next generation of animators than a full-fledged film. Well, that's why studio veteran Eric Larson, who, by the way, actually one of Walt's 9 old men, right along with Les Clark, Mark Davis, Ollie Johnson, Milt Call, Ward Kimball, John Lonsbury, Wooly Reitherman, and Frank Thomas. It was Eric who got tapped to be the director of the small one. And the thinking here was, well, since Larson had personally trained a lot of these kids and had been working so closely with the next generation of animators, that Eric would know best what their individual strengths were, what their weaknesses were. More to the point, he would know who exactly to cast when it came to which animator worked on what character in the small one. This was the original plan. But things changed one Monday in late 1977, early 1978, when Larson, Gary, and Young came into work that morning, and as they walked into the room at the studio where they'd been developing the movie version of this Charles Townswell story, only to then discover that their storyboards had all been stripped down off the walls and moved to another wing of the animation building, because from here on in, Don Bluth would now be the new director of the small one. Now, where this gets interesting is that, well, that over-the-weekend change-out of who was directing the small one was reportedly done at the behest of Ron Miller. Because Miller looked at Don Bluth and thought that he was, in fact, the future of Walt Disney Animation Studio, the guy who would eventually replace Wooly Reitherman as the lead director on all of the studio's upcoming feature-length animated projects, not to mention any featurettes or shorts. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Reitherman's career at Disney Studios, Wooly was the lead director, the key decision maker on every feature-length film that the Mouse House churned out, from Sword in the Stone, first released December of '63, right through to The Rescuers. And again, that was out in theaters June of '77. So to have Ron Miller deliberately making these sorts of behind-the-scenes moves that would then make it easier for Don Bluth to assume Wooly Reitherman's leadership role at Walt Disney Feature Animation, that was a really big deal. And another factor in all of this behind-the-scene maneuvering at Disney at that time was, well, to be blunt, the old guard at feature animation was getting really old. Eric Larson, for example, he was 71. Wooly Reitherman was 69. John Lansbury, another member of the 9 Old Men, he actually dropped dead of a heart attack the year previous. This is February of '76, right in the middle of production of The Rescuers at the age of 64. And to Ron Miller's way of thinking, it was now time to hand things off to the next generation of Disney animators. And since Don Bluth had only just turned 40, well, were he to step into a leadership role at the studio now, Bluth could conceivably be on the job for the next 25, 30 years, which would then give the Mouse Factory some creative continuity, which is Miller thinking he was doing the right thing for Disney Studios, long term, I mean. That's why he didn't hesitate to take the small one away from Eric Larson and then hand it off to Don Bluth to direct. But what Ron did not take into account is that, well, Larson's students, the studio's new animators who were supposed to be working on the featurette as a training exercise, would come to resent Bluth, if only because Don, because he was now the new director of the small one, had robbed their beloved teacher of the opportunity to helm an animated version of this Charles Townswell story. And Bluth, he learned the hard way that when you push aside somebody as beloved as Eric Larson was at Disney Studios, well, it's not just the new kids who resent you, but it's also the old guard and the studio support staff, which is why things got pretty frosty for Don inside of the feature animation building as the small one was moving through its production process. And what further muddied the water at Disney back in 77 and 78 was that, well, Don Bluth didn't necessarily want to be the next Woody Reitherman. He wanted to be the next Walt Disney, which at this point of time actually seemed like something that could possibly happen in the not-so-distant future. And to explain, two Disney executives, Rich Irvine and James L. Stewart, had recently left the Mouse House and were now in the process of setting up their own production company, which was known as Aurora Productions. And the idea here was that Rich and James would enter into direct competition with Disney and eventually beat the Mouse at their own game, which was producing movies and TV shows for the family audience. I mean, Irvine and Stewart felt, because they'd observed this up close during the years working at Disney Studios, that the Mouse was churning out really lackluster live-action fare then. Films like The Cat from Outer Space or Hot Lead and Cold Feet, which meant that Disney was losing its grasp on an audience that had previously been really loyal to the Mouse. And that was largely because the subject matter that the execs at Disney were choosing to build movies and TV shows around was kind of safe, blah, predictable. And Rich and James knew that Don Bluth, was having similar frustrations with the folks in senior management at Disney. And that was because for 4 years now, Bluth and a select group of Disney animators have been working on a passion project on their weekends away from the studio. This long-in-the-works animated feature, Banjo the Woodpile Cat, was something that Don hoped Disney Studios would eventually release under their feature animation banner. The only problem was Bluth had reportedly recently screened a work-in-progress version of Banjo for executives at Disney Studio, only to then be told that, well, this passion project of his just wasn't up to Disney Feature Animation's high standards. So it was doubtful that the studio would ever send Banjo out into theaters under the Disney banner, which, if I'm being honest here, made Don Bluth a little crazy, because a lot of the very same animators who were now working on the small one for Disney Studios had also worked on Banjo the Woodpile Cat. So this is why Bluth began to think, that there's a double standard at play here. Anyway, Irvine and Stewart had heard about the Banjo the Woodpile Cat situation, and knowing that Bluth was already unhappy because of the situation Ron Miller put Don in by removing Eric Larson as the director of the small one, well, Rich and James began discreetly reaching out to Don, letting him know that should he ever decide to leave Disney Feature Animation, there would be a home for him at Aurora Productions. And as to what happens next, well, you're going to have to come back next week for the second and final installment of this series, where we learn that the small one leads to a big, big problem at Disney Feature Animation. Mind you, when I tell the rest of the story on Fine Tooning next week, hopefully Drew will have recovered from his Christmas crud. And if you missed hearing Mr. Taylor's voice as much as I did this week, well, I want to remind you there's always Light the Fuse, which is the official Mission Impossible podcast that Drew did with Charles Hood, and there are nearly 300 episodes of that show in that podcast archive, and each of them loaded with amazing behind-the-scenes stories about the film industry. And by the way, I hope you folks think the same thing about the shows here when you listen to the podcast of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. You deliver some amazing stories. And by the way, those shows include Disney Dish with Len Testa, the Epic Universal podcast. That's the one I do with Eric Hersey. Likewise, I Want That Too. That's the Disney Merch podcast I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. Also want to remind you about Marvelous Disney. Dan Graney, I literally earlier tonight recorded a brand new episode of that podcast where we talked about all the information that's been leaking out lately when it comes to Avengers Doomsday and Spider-Man Brand New Day. By the way, Mr. Graney also does a great job over on the Hubbubbery, which is that video show that Dan does with Hunter Lange. Be sure and check that out. Oh, speaking of videos, this coming Sunday, December 28th, there'll be a brand new Patreon exclusive show dropping where Len, veteran Imagineer Jim Schul and I, we walk around the Magic Kingdom in Florida and then check out all of the new stuff there that's debuted at that theme park over the past 2 years. And just a few days after that, we'll be posting a brand new episode of The Case 4 with Chris Cox, and this one takes a look at whether it's a good idea to spend New Year's Eve inside of a Disney park. And let's see, I'm running for the curtain now, but as I do, I want to thank Eric Hersey and David Gray for the great job these two do when it comes to the editing and production of this podcast. Also have a quick favor to ask, folks. If you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this show as well as light the fuse. Also probably need to mention social media on the way by. Drew, you can find in that space by searching Drew Tailored, like in a tailored shirt. Me on the other hand, you can find me on Instagram, X, as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. And that is going to do it for this week, folks. And on behalf of the absent but missed Mr. Taylor, thanks for listening to this week's Fine Tuning. I also want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a colorful and bright Kwanzaa, not to mention a very Happy New Year. I think I hit all the holidays. And with that, the two of us, Drew and me, will be back soon.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. Mm-hmm. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.